An important step to being able to draw anything from your imagination is learning the rules of perspective. Learning the rules of perspective will allow you to create three-dimensional space in your drawings and to draw the simple forms, boxes, spheres, cones, and cylinders from any angle. As I've said before, once you learn to draw those simple forms from any angle and learn to see everyday objects in terms of those simple forms, you'll then have the skills needed to draw anything from your imagination. So let's begin and learn the basics of the easiest type of perspective, one-point perspective. This perspective is useful for drawing objects head-on. You will see this perspective when you're standing in the middle of railroad tracks looking into the distance, or in the middle of a city street, looking down a long hallway, in an interior room when you're parallel with one of the walls, or even looking at rectangular objects in a still life head-on. The rules of perspective I'm going to teach you were developed during the Renaissance by famous artists like Raphael, Da Vinci, Brunelleschi, and others. The first line we need to establish in one-point perspective is the horizon line, or eye level. Place the horizon line a little above the center of the page. It's good to avoid placing things in the center and evenly dividing your drawing. For this first drawing, let's draw a very basic city street. The first thing I like to do in drawing in perspective is establish my ground plane. So let's draw a line for the side of the street. And then a line on the other side for the other side of the street. All parallel lines are going to converge to the vanishing point, just like when we saw on the railroad tracks. Now let's draw a sidewalk on this side and a sidewalk on this side. Now the sidewalk has some thickness, so we want to show it coming off of the plane of the street. So we'll draw another little line there and another little one here to show the side of the sidewalk. Let's put some telephone poles in. I can put my first pole in anywhere. I'll make it start here, and I want the top of it to go above the horizon line. If it was below the horizon line, it would make it look like we're really up high in the air. For my second pole, I'm going to draw some guidelines that show me where the top and the bottom of the pole should be before I start drawing the lines for the pole. I'll draw one light guideline from the bottom of my first pole to the vanishing point. That's going to show me where the bottom of all my poles are going to be. Then I'll draw another light guideline from the top of my first pole to the vanishing point. This is going to show me the height of all my poles going back into the distance. I can place my second pole anywhere between these two guidelines. Right here looks about right to me. So I'll go ahead and draw the second pole. With our two poles drawn, you can see that the objects going back in space get smaller as they get closer to the vanishing point. We'll see in a minute that they also get closer together. For my third pole, I could guess where to place it, but I prefer to know exactly. When you want to place evenly spaced objects in perspective, like telephone poles or street lights, windows, ceiling tiles, so on and so forth, you can use this method of dividing space. The two telephone poles and their guidelines describe a rectangle that is standing up in perspective. I'm going to draw some more light guidelines using this rectangle. First, I'll draw lines connecting each of the two corners, making an X inside the rectangle. Where the two lines of the X cross gives me the exact center in perspective of that rectangle. If I draw a vertical line through the center of the X, this gives me a vertical center line in perspective for that rectangle. I've just divided the space between the poles in half. I'm going to divide the rectangle in half the other way by drawing a line through the center of the X to the vanishing point. This gives me a horizontal center line and shows me where halfway up the pole is. Next, I'm going to draw a line from the top corner of the rectangle through the point where the horizontal center line crosses the back vertical of the rectangle. I'll extend this line until it crosses my guideline for the bottom of the poles. This new point gives me the placement for my third pole at exactly the same distance as the first pole is from the second in perspective. This method of dividing space is really useful and really important. We're going to practice it together until you can do it without thinking. With the placement of my third pole established, I can now draw in the third pole. To draw the fourth pole, I'll repeat the same method. I already have a horizontal center line from before, so I just need to draw a line from the top corner of the new rectangle through the horizontal center line in the back vertical, and then extend it until it runs through the bottom of my rectangle. Where it crosses the bottom gives me the placement for my fourth pole. I'll use this method of dividing space several more times so I have poles placed all the way to the vanishing point. That will make the drawing really look like it goes back in space. I'm going to speed this part up a little bit in order to keep the video short. Once you're finished with the guidelines, you can erase them. That's why it's important when you're drawing them to draw them very light. I'll draw some curved lines to connect the telephone poles together on both sides. Next, to add to that feeling of perspective, I'm going to draw the dashed line in the middle of the road. And to do that, I'm going to use the same method that I used with the telephone poles of making a rectangle and dividing the space. First, I'm going to draw two lines on the road that go off and meet the vanishing point. Next, I'm going to draw a box. And my first box got cut off at the bottom of the drawing, but you can see where I've gone corner to corner to make my X. Next, I'm going to make my center line, and then I'll use that same method of going from the corner through where the center line crosses to make my next division. And I'm going to repeat that process again and again and again to make some guides for where the dashed lines are going to go. I'll speed this up a little bit. Next, I'll draw in the little rectangles that are the dashed lines, and I'll make them a little bit shorter than my guideline boxes. That'll give a little bit of space in between each of the dashed lines. Once I've drawn them all in, then I can eliminate all the guidelines by erasing them. For the left-hand side of my drawing, I'm going to draw a building, and I'm going to do that again by first drawing some very light guidelines. I'm going to draw one on the bottom very lightly to establish the bottom of the building, and then one a little higher up to establish the roof line, and then I'll establish the front and back of the building with some guidelines. Next, the sides of the buildings are going to be flat. I'm going to put an X to mark where the exact middle of the building is in perspective, and that's where I'm going to put my door frame. I'll draw some more guidelines to show me where the top and the bottom of the window sills are going to be. And then I'm ready to darken up some of those lines. I'll draw in the windowsills using the top and bottom guidelines that I put in. And in this perspective, the windowsills are below the horizon line. So that means we're going to see the bottom of the sill. So you should indicate a little bit of thickness there and on the side of the sill that's further away from us. So add another extra little line to show the thickness of the sill. We'll put a little trim around that door frame as well. I'll put in a line where the top of my roof is and draw the front edge of it and then connect that with the other corner of the house. We'll just make this an easy roof with a gable in the front and then flat. Then of course I'll have to erase my horizon line. To finish off the drawing, I'm going to put a few clouds in the sky. I'll put some bushes on the right-hand side that overlap and get smaller as they go back in perspective. And I'll draw some mountains or some hills on the horizon line and fill those in with a little tone. Thanks for watching.